Ilkley Manor House Storytime.
This is the story of the Elves and the Shoemaker. Once upon a time, a shoemaker who was so poor he only had enough leather to make one pair of shoes. Late one night, he cut the precious leather and carefully laid the pieces on his workbench, ready for sewing the following day. But when he came down the next morning, an amazing sight met his eyes. In place of the little pile of leather pieces lay the finest pair of shoes he had ever seen. So small were the stitches and so skillful the work that the shoes sold for twice as much as the shoemaker expected. And now he had enough money to buy leather for 2 pairs of shoes. Once again, the shoemaker cut out the leather and laid the pieces on his bench before he went to bed. This time, there were 2 pairs of shoes when he came down in the morning. The shoemaker looked at the tiny stitches and neat little holes in the leather. "This is the work of a master cobbler," he said to his wife. The shoes sold for twice the price he expected, and now the shoemaker could buy enough leather for 4 pairs of shoes. Time went by, and the shoemaker grew rich. People came from far and wide to buy his beautiful shoes. He only had to lay out the pieces of leather at night for the shoes to be completed by the morning. But the shoemaker's wife was consumed with curiosity. She wanted to know who it was that came in the night and hammered and pierced and stitched so skillfully. So she persuaded her husband to sit up and watch with her one night. Not long after the lights had gone out, when all was quiet, 2 tiny men in rags and tatters appeared from under the floor. They climbed onto the bench, and all night long they hammered and pierced and stitched. They sang as they worked, and their fingers flew so fast the shoemaker could hardly believe his eyes. By first light, 40 pairs of shoes lay up on the bench. The shoemaker stood up, but the little men disappeared through a crack in the floorboards before he could say a word. "How can we thank them? What can we give these marvellous cobblers?" he asked his wife, who was quick with an answer. "Clothes, husband, clothes. Didn't you see they were dressed in rags and tatters? I could sew them a suit of clothes and you could make them a pair of boots." When the little men appeared the following night, there were no pieces of leather for them to hammer, pierce, and stitch. Instead, 2 piles of tiny garments lay on the bench. 2 little hats, one with a feather, 2 little suits with embroidered belts, and 2 tiny pairs of fancy leather boots. The elves, for elves they were, put on their new clothes and capered about, laughing with glee and singing, "Fine boys, now we must find the door. Cobbling we shall do no more." They rushed about the room, and when at last they found the door, they lifted the latch and skipped out into the night, still laughing and singing. The shoemaker and his wife never saw the elves again, but they continued to prosper, and good luck stayed with them to the end of their days.